that kind of leads me a little bit into our next topic, which I think is a little bit of a hot topic, maybe. But in terms of policing and how police officers are being prosecuted in the event that something, even with all of our best intentions and training, things happen, and there are times that people lose their lives or something injustice occurs,
Right.
and police officers at some point might have to answer legally to that.
Right.
So how do you think, I guess, explain a little bit about, policing and what is the protection or allowances that happen within police officers to do their job? And are we prosecuting police officers to a different level than we are to the average person, or are we doing too little or too much? And where does that accountability, even when we're training people and we have leadership, where, how is that accountability coming down when something doesn't work the right way? And how are we making sure there's a checks and balances system?
Right. So we already know that police officers have some type of immunity when it comes to certain things. You can't sue police officers for some of the acts that they do carrying out their duties. We have some protections in place for that. And we also have other protections in place when it comes to how we prosecute them based off upon if another reasonable officer would have done some of the same things that they did
Right.
when it comes to these cases. So obviously we have special rules in place, and that's for a very good reason, because if you start evaluating things just off another citizen,
Right.
they're not going to know how this stuff works. They don't know how an officer responds, or the defense, or the use of force continuum. And there's so many different things that a regular everyday citizen doesn't know about policing that you would have to judge it off based off another reasonable officer. So that way you have someone that been in that situation that has responded in another way that may be different than what was warranted. You see what I'm saying? So you got to have a measuring stick per se. You see what I'm saying? So another reasonable officer is the measuring stick when it comes to these prosecutions. But when we start talking about like the situation with Rayshard Brooks or George Floyd, I mean, those are two different situations. One of them was egregious, and it was clear cut. Nobody, it's not going to find anybody that's like, oh yeah, that was just no. It was not.
Both the public and police officers look at that as that nothing was done correctly in that.
Nobody. And with Rayshard Brooks, it's a little slippery. Some police officers believe it was, justified, that he did everything that he's supposed to do, and that he's the officer getting charged is basically being scapegoated by the media and by the DA. So in order for him to get reelected, which he obviously
failed to do,
he did fail to do that, and other people believe that maybe some of the stuff that he did was justified, but he could have took other actions.
Right.
And that's where I lean, because I believe in regards to that shooting that, yeah, he was justified legally to do it. But, given the circumstances surrounding it and the fact that, the man didn't have a weapon and he only took the taser off you
and he was fleeing at the time,
he was fleeing, and there's so a fleeing subject with a taser, I can apprehend anytime I want to.
Right.
I have his vehicle, I have all his information. I don't need to apprehend him right away. I don't think at least for me, and this is the outside looking in, because this is where it's slippery.
Right.
Outside looking in, I say, well, he's not dangerous to the public. He's got a taser. He's got 1, 2 shots, maybe 3 shots max. I think one of them may have 3 shots, but for the one I've used, it's usually a 1 or 2 shot. So he doesn't have any other shots with this taser. Now, where I got pushback was, okay, well, how do you know it's a taser? How do you know you didn't pull a weapon somewhere? Like, that's true. You didn't do a strip search or anything, or a thorough search of him. So maybe you don't know that he has a weapon stashed somewhere. And that goes back to why I said, why pursue him anyway?
Right.
He's taking off. You got the vehicle. You got his information. Even if he gets away, we know where he's going.
Right.
So we can still wait for backup and then apprehend him another way.
Sure.
So that's why I said I didn't like the fact that he felt the need that it had to end right then, there, right now. I felt like he should have, de-escalated and backed off and stepped back from the situation and evaluated as a whole. But the reason why I get pushback is because, well, you're not in the situation. So you don't know
It's always easy to Monday morning
Right,
quarterback
absolutely.
when you're not in that day and time and you're not experiencing
And
everything in those
and
moments. But
that's why I think, well, I don't want to say unfortunately, I'll just say he'll probably not end up getting prosecuted
Right.
and getting convicted. Whether he's getting prosecuted, but he won't probably end up getting convicted because legally he was justified in what
Right.
he did, and that's why it would look so silly when the DA, what I forgot his name,
Paul Howard.
Paul Howard, yeah, the DA, he looked so silly because just a few weeks ago he had just basically prosecuted 6 officers,
Right.
one for just pointing a taser and the others for deploying those, which it
Right.
is a non-lethal weapon. And then now they're saying it is a lethal weapon.
Right.
So they don't know what they want to be. Is it a
Right.
lethal weapon? Is it a non-lethal weapon? Which one is it? So I think he's going to probably, both of those officers are probably not going to get convicted when it
Right.
comes to that situation.
Right.
So I think we as a public need to understand what the laws are and understand that even though something may not look right or it may not feel right or you feel like it could happen another way, doesn't mean that means that person is going to needs to be prosecuted and needs to be convicted.
Right.
There needs to be changes to how police are going about doing these things, the training and stuff. That's why we were talking about what we were talking about before is
Right.
de-escalation training. We need to have more emphasis in that. But that doesn't mean that because this officer made a different decision that he needs to go to jail and he needs to spend time in prison.
Right.
That's not how I believe that should go down because this is how he was trained.
Right.
I understand why he did what he
Sure.
did. Because if somebody took my taser from me and they pointed at me in a situation, my recourse is to shoot them.
Right.
Because
Well, you have split second, not even barely milliseconds of decision making
Right.
in that case, so that you don't know what's happening, and so you have to make the best educated decision at that moment.
right, because if he does find a way to basically incapacitate you,
Right.
then he could take your gun and in fact shoot you or
Right.
other people around you.
Right.
So you have to defend yourself in that way against the taser because it does have the ability to incapacitate you, immobilize you.
and could lead to a deadly situation.
exactly.
For you and those around you.
Absolutely.
In the community
So
as well.
I see why he did it,
Right.
but I'm saying that he had other options
Right.
that he could have exercised. So that's why I don't like that he did it. I don't think he should have did
Do
it.
you think that when it comes to things like this with police and that there is a situation like this, and obviously we've seen countless videos come out where the public has a reaction to the decisions that were made, do you think that it's that we should have a system in place where there's more of an internal review within the police department before we get to the legal action of district attorneys and things like that, and allow a council maybe of police, either former police officers as well as maybe community, that can make a decision on, is this
On the
something
prosecution or on?
just in terms of if we should be prosecuting or deciding if prosecution should occur more internally within the police department prior to.
I don't think that's gonna work. The trust is at an all-time low between the community and the police departments. There's no way they would trust the police department to prosecute their own people and make those decisions.
So you think it still should be then decided by, like, district attorneys should still be
I
enforcing
think
that?
you should have independent investigations like we do with the GBI coming in and conducting their I think that should have been leaned on.
Right, more so than.
I got to go back and find out the results of that. I don't know if that's something we want to look up and find out what was their finding on that shooting and what they recommend. But yeah, I think that's probably the best course of action, to have an independent reviewer. But you don't want a situation where you having the actual police department investigating
Right.
their own shootings, because for right now, at
Of
least
course
right
it's-
now, the trust is not high.
Right.
So you're not going to have a situation where the public is going to be like,
But do you
"Oh,
think the
did
people
this
who should
fairly."
be reviewing this are people who have more of a understanding of what policing occurs, as opposed to people who might not have, like, from an outsider perspective, they might see a situation entirely different.
Well, that's why I think the independent investigation is so important, because you can lean heavily on that as a DA, as a prosecutor, to determine what you want to do.
Right.
And then, of course, you got a grand jury you got to go before.
Right. Do you think that we're prosecuting police officers too much or not enough, or how do you think that I mean?
Every situation is different.
Right.
It's one of those things where, like, I can't say, oh, we're prosecuting them too much, but then it might be a situation where they didn't deserve it according to the law. Yeah, to pick back up, every situation is different. I can't say, oh yeah, we're prosecuting the officers way too much now, because, if it warrants it, we need to go forth with those prosecutions. And you also don't want to say, you don't want to just start prosecuting officers more because you just think so. It has to be because of the law.
Right.
And
Do you think there's been situations that prosecution has occurred more because of the public reaction and not
absolutely.
because of it being a maybe valid reason, or maybe it was, if it's a situation which it could go either way, that sometimes now it's leaning more towards prosecute the police officers to get more of a public.
It's a court of public opinion. I
Right.
mean, like I said, we could look at Paul Howard and point to his erratic behavior when
Yeah.
it comes to prosecution and putting on this nice little bonanza where he gets up there, puts his little digital screens up and
Right.
tries to break things down.
Well, and then we get more into the politicization of how are we
Absolutely.
doing this, and are we using our police officers as a way to
Gain votes.
gain votes and also just popularity, or
Absolutely. So it's one of those things where if people want to see officers get prosecuted more, then they need to protest the laws and try to find a way to put different laws in place where that's something that they want. The problem, like I said, the problem lies is that once you open this box, you got to understand the consequences that come along with it. If I'm still policing and now I know I'm going to be subject to more prosecution,
right,
and I'm only making $40,000 a year,
right, and you have the potential to go be put in prison for
Right.
something you might have to
for a
do
long
on the
period of
job.
time, or even just be civilly sued to a
Right.
point where I don't have a home to stay in.
Right,
I don't know if I want to stay in that profession or not.
right.
So
There's a
it-
lot more risk when it comes to making
right.
that
So
decision.
it's one of those things where people got to understand there's always going to be consequences to every action. So if you decide that this is the road we want to go down, and we want to make sure we're going to hold every officer accountable for every situation.
Right.
And like I said, for the ones that it warrants, I don't have a problem with that. But let's just make sure we're not getting so slippery and outside the box to where what would be justified viewed amongst the peers and a reasonable officer is now viewed as against the law, illegal from the public standpoint and from the citizen standpoint. So now we've changed the laws to where something that should be justified is no longer justified.
Right.
And you're just going to create a situation where you're going to have more hesitation on the officer part because he's not going to know, what.
Well, now
he
there's
can
more of a
and can't
gray
do.
area too, when you
Right.
don't know what, and if the decision to prosecute a police officer now depends on the other situations that are happening around it, now there's a gray area and people aren't going to be certain if what they're doing, even if it's correct, is that going to get you in trouble?
Right.
And that leads to so much more. And I think the
That's the
take
hesitation.
home message is, confusion and not having a clear set of what the standards and understanding of what is and isn't correct. That's going to lead to bad decision or poor decision making and further create more problems in that regard.
It's going to create
too.
consequences in other regard. I mean, now you're going to have officers making decisions that they normally wouldn't make, and it could potentially result in the harm of themselves or someone else that's involved in the situation.
Right.
So, I mean, hesitation is a real thing. I've seen many officers, due to the fact of fear of either public outcry, or public response, or superior department response, what I was talking earlier
Right.
about leadership and things of that nature. So, and then they don't act.
Right.
They just let everything go. And then when you do that, now you have a society where crime is, rampant.
Right.
And that is something that does happen. If people see that you can get away with stuff without punishment, without recourse, they will exploit. It's simply how it goes.
Right.
So we really have to pay attention to what we're doing and understand that while we want to make changes to the law so people don't have to be in contact with the officers as much, like one of the things I always talked about is the marijuana laws. I don't know why as a country we have not legalized marijuana, because it's such a dumb thing for people to be going out and locking people up for. Because here we have tobacco, here we have alcohol that is, if it's not as dangerous, it's even more dangerous than weed or marijuana. So why are we wasting resources? Why are we wasting time dealing with the prosecution and making these scenarios where officers are put in positions to come face to face with people that's doing these things and making it a criminal activity? So that basically opens up more opportunity for things to happen
Right.
and go wrong.
Right.
So that's why I say it's probably best served for us to put more emphasis in the laws that we are enforcing and the laws that are on the books than it is to change the laws that protect police officers. Because like I said before, the more and more protections you take away, the more and more apt for somebody to take on all this responsibility, $45,000, because you want to defund them too.
Right.
So it's one of those things where it's a double-edged sword. You cannot think that you're gonna have one thing and then it's not gonna affect the others.
Right.
Because it's too many different chessboards that you got to move pieces on. Because if you just think you're gonna win this one game,
Right.
and you don't pay attention to the other games, well, you might have won this one game, but the other games you lost.
Mm-hmm.
Your communities are worse off now,
Right.
and the officers don't have any more training, so they're still, even though you may have changed the way you prosecute them, people still end up dying and things of that nature,
Right.
or de-escalation doesn't end up implemented,
Right.
and you still lost your loved one,
Right.
and yeah, you might be able to now sue the officer, but he has no money anyway
Right.
because he's not getting paid,
Right.
and you sue your city. Well, now your city
And is
doesn't
that
have any money.
changing? Is that changing? When we have situations where police officers getting prosecuted, did we suddenly see that those problems went away?
No.
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 It's a solution, and there's justice that comes from something that if it is
Right.
egregious, but ultimately if we keep having the same thing happen over and over again,
Right.
we haven't solved anything. We're just
No.
now giving somebody punishment for it, but
Right.
we're still, people are still dying, and then police officers are still losing their jobs. So nobody's winning in that case.
Right, and I don't want to, I don't want to just say, people having to face justice is small. No,
Right.
that's very important.
It should happen.
Absolutely.
Right.
But I think people have to understand. I think to me the point is to make sure this doesn't happen.
Right.
again.
We want to stop all of this from
Yeah.
happening, not just making sure that justice happens when something happens. We don't want it to even begin.
Right.
We don't have to want to go down that
Right,
pathway
and I
anymore.
think that starts with the laws that are enforced
Right.
and the laws that are on the books. So that's where it starts, and procedures and things of that nature as well.
So
That's-
change needs to come from well above and outside of police in order to make
absolutely.
sure
It has
that
to
we.
it has to change our society and what we choose to enforce, what laws we choose to carry out, and tell our police officers to go out there and uphold.
Yeah.
You know, I'm a big proponent of violent crime should be priority number one. I
Sure.
don't care about, like I do think there's certain traffic stuff that needs to be monitored as well, because we don't want accidents to happen everywhere. We don't.
I mean, it's
try to
Atlanta,
enforce some
so we're
traffic.
already seeing lots of accidents.
Yeah,
everywhere.
but we got to have some type of traffic control in terms of traffic patrol, rather, in terms of trying to keep people from being out there DUI and
Sure,
running
right.
everybody
When
over.
there's people who are putting safety at risk,
Right.
then it needs to be
Right, and even
prosecuted.
some of your even you still do need some kind of narcotic team or that are fighting more the.
But they should be going after the people who are really the ones
major
that are
drug
moving the
dealers,
drugs,
like,
not the people who are
cartels.
selling weed on a
Exactly. The guy
small
that's got
time
a couple
basis.
bags, no nickels or dimes. I don't care about that
right.
stuff.
That's
and
not where the
neither should-
narcotics unit needs to be focused.
Exactly. You don't need teams that now taking 10 people to jail because everybody had a nickel bag on 'em. I don't need to see any more of that.
Right.
That's some of the things that I think need to change when it comes to where we're putting our emphasis on as a police department.
Sure.
But the only way that's going to happen is if we change the way the whole system and the laws in place. Because believe it or not, the reason why they do that a lot of times, sometimes, is because of the funding.
Right.
Because you get money for taking
Not
people
that
to
there's a
jail.
thing called quotas.
Oh, well, no, there's nothing called quota, but we have to understand that a lot of funding comes from
Right.
the fact that people pay fines, and these fines help fund their city government.
Right.
So when you're getting fined out the wazoo and you got to go pay these traffic tickets and all that thing, where do you think that money's going? You think they're
Yeah.
just throwing it away or something? Like this is, we're going to donate all this to the Salvation Army.
Right.
Absolutely not. This
Yeah.
is going towards some of your city services.
I can't remember which city it was in Georgia. But it was it's outside of Atlanta, but they
Right.
basically there was some big review because they were finding out that they basically would sit, on highways or interstates and get people going through, and they'd pull them over for speeding, and they found that it was making a significant amount of their budget was coming from that, and they're like, is this really what you should be doing legally? And I mean,
Yeah, I don't disagree. You shouldn't be doing that. I don't
Right.
think the majority of your funding should come from fines
Right.
and putting people in jail. No, that's not how your funding should come
right, because that's how you get police doing things just to police to get funding, and you
Right.
don't want to put that pressure of getting funding for police departments shouldn't be on finding people to find,
from.
right?
Or taking people to jail. And it should also not be looked upon as, if officers don't take people to jail and if they don't write tickets,
Right, that
then
they're not doing their job.
Exactly. And that's the problem.
Uh.
I mean, and not only just from the public standpoint, but from the department standpoint, because even some chiefs didn't believe like that. Oh,
Right.
we didn't get enough tickets today, or we didn't get
Right.
well, if you want to do community policing and you want to actually, try to relate to your community and try to, establish a better relationship, it's probably gonna be better served you not to arrest everybody
Right.
and not to be writing tickets every time
I mean,
somebody
the
does something
goal,
wrong.
I hope, is not to fine and arrest people, right? In any situation, unless they have done something that requires it,
Right.
like you don't, speeding tickets and little infractions and things like that. Is
Right.
that really what we want our police to be focusing on? And is that making
Like
the
I said,
community
it's
better?
important because you don't want to, leave it completely
Right.
unmonitored because then next thing you know, people going, it's a goddamn NASCAR race out there every
Right.
time people get on the highway. But at the same time, I also don't want a goddamn 100-man team of just traffic control.
Right.
And now we don't have anybody else just looking for the violent criminals,
Right.
for the armed robberies and murders and assaults and domestic violence, et cetera, et cetera. So we got to have a healthy balance between, just keeping the traffic, control and making sure that people don't think they can go out there and do whatever they want to when they
Right.
get out there on the roads, but also understand that we need more emphasis on the violent crime because that's what really runs people out of neighborhoods. Nobody running out of neighborhoods because, oh man, I'm just gotta get out of here because the cops are pulling too many people over.
Right.
That's not why they get out of these neighborhoods. They
Right.
get out of these neighborhoods because there's too many shootings going on. There's too many and drug activity is another thing. That's why I said maybe decriminalization of some of these drugs maybe help impact the legitimacy and why and how people sell drugs. Because I mean, you look at some of these states now; they have distilleries and shops and things of that
Right.
nature, and that could help your business out, which in turn could help your city government out.
Right.
So
you can get revenue from those.
absolutely.
As soon as the
So-
government gets to regulate something, they can make money off of it too. So
exactly. So it's
if you have a budget problem, maybe that might help.
right. So now your drug dealer don't need to be out there, underneath and
Right.
undercover and try to do things on the low. He could, be out in the open now almost.
Right.
And I know that's kind of weird to say as a police officer, but I think that's some of the changes that we got to make in order to get forward in society. Because believe it or not, it ain't working.
Right.
Crime is out of control in a lot of areas where people are just fleeing. Like I would never move to some of these areas because of the crime
Right.
and the criminal activity that's going on, and the fact that police doesn't have near the funding that they need,
Right.
and they're going to need. And I don't think they're ever going to get near the funding they're
Right.
going to need because
Right.
they're probably already getting ridiculous amount of funding. Think about it. The New York Police Department, how many billion did they say? Was it 4 billion?
I think it was 6 billion, and they
Was it 6
defunded to
billion?
5 billion. I think.
$6
Yeah, which is kind of an insane
billion
amount of money to think about, but
That's crazy.
yeah,
So what am I supposed to do? All right, well, we'll give you another 2-3 billion.
right. To
I
do,
Right.
with it.
Right. Is it gonna work?
is it effective now? Is the money we're giving being effective
Right.
now, and what we actually need to
Right.
focus
And
on?
that does, like I said, that does not mean that I want to defund them. It
Right.
just means that, okay, guys, maybe instead of giving you more money, we need to find a way to change some of these laws and to find a way why people are committing these crimes.
Right.
That's what we need to address. Why is crime being committed when
Right.
it comes to violent crime, when it comes to domestic violence and other things of that nature? Why? We got to address the why the crime's being committed. So that way we don't need as much of a response. Because that's what policing is. It's just a response.
Right. Right.
It's only so much active work they do.
Right.
And it's very small. It's usually, that's why you have to call 911 to get an officer to respond to what just happened.
Right.
But we need to get behind of why it's happening
Right.
and address those problems. And I don't think we're going to do that until we change the laws and we also start changing abundance of other things that have
Sure.
to do with what people deal with on a day-to-day basis.
Right.
So
Yeah. Well, I always say when it comes to policing in terms of just and prosecution and things like that, I think, it's great that we have people out there now being able to videotape what's been going on, and
Oh,
we have
that's
body
great.
cameras
It
and
is
things
great.
like that. But I can only imagine how stressful that is, because I think about what would happen if my boss had I had a body cam on and he could monitor everything that I was doing and or standing there and watching me, or somebody coming and
Right.
videotaping me while I work. First of all, that would stress me out, because I'd be like, now that I'm being watched, I'm thinking about absolutely everything I'm doing.
Right.
And that's when you make mistakes. I always say when somebody's when I'm training somebody and I'm doing something, that's when I make some stupid mistake, because I'm so focused on doing things a certain way that I start making mistakes. So I always think that when it comes to this, it's good that we have all this, video and that, but then we're also unfortunately prosecuting police officers based on only what we're capturing in those moments and things like that. I think it affects psychologically how you're conducting things, because you're being watched by a bunch of people.
Right.
And again, you're being pulled by having to make do the right thing by your upper management and also about the community, all in a stressful situation. I think it's really hard to start putting people, from an outsider perspective, to be able to be in those shoes and to be able to say that they did the right thing or the wrong thing when they're not doing it themselves and they're not in those moments. So I know it's a really stressful job and also doesn't come with a lot of pay or great benefits in that regard. So, the prosecution is just an added layer, I'm sure, of stress and things
Yeah,
like that.
and I know you touched on body cameras. I'll try not to go down that
We might
hole.
have to just do a whole thing about it.
I'll try not to go down that hole, but I'll just give a brief thing about that. Is just I'm a big fan of it when it comes to violent. I guess when we're on the policing side, when it comes to when they're dealing with situations where they're gonna have to use force,
Right.
I am a big proponent of it and what leads up to it. I think my thing is I don't think it should be for every encounter.
Right.
And
But how do you know an encounter is going to go that way? I think the Rayshard Brooks is actually a great example of how, for almost an hour beforehand, everything was very calm and was not violent. And there was no, even when I saw it, and maybe you see things differently, but looking at it, I wouldn't have ever thought that in those, how quickly that thing changed from being fairly calm and very casual conversation and seemed comfortable for everybody involved, and it switched. So how do you ensure that when those moments happen, because if you're saying only in those violent or kind of more difficult scenarios, the Rayshard Brooks, do you think they would have had time to turn their body camera on in those moments when
let me
things
amend
changed?
what I'm saying. So not only violent encounters, but also when you finna effect the arrest. I think before you effect the arrest, it's something that needs to come on.
Okay, that's
that
fair.
way we can get the lead up and what happened in that regard. But I think it should be linked more into your equipment. They have the technology now where they can link it to whenever you pull your gun or whenever you pull your equipment, camera automatically comes on.
Right.
But see, what I don't think we need to be recording anybody every time they have an encounter with the public.
Right.
Because I think that's going to take away some of the human element of
Right.
these officers. Because
Right.
if I got to talk because I'm telling you, it's like with this camera on. Yeah, there's certain things that I'll say with the camera on, and there's certain things that I say when the camera's not on.
Right.
And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with
Right.
talking a certain way with the camera on and talking a certain way with the camera off. Now, obviously, if you're going to say you're going to portray yourself as something you're not, that's
Right.
highly different. But obviously, the language and the things that goes on. I can tell you right now, if you ask me as a police officer, have I cussed out anybody in the public? You better believe it. It's
Right.
probably out there for people to view if they wanted to. I've definitely cussed out some people because that's how they communicate amongst themselves, and that's how they understand
Sure.
when somebody means, hey, man, this shit's got to stop. And see how I say it like that. You might have to say it like that instead of, hey, we got to stop these things, guys.
Right.
Let's stop. Because everybody don't relate to that.
Right.
And everybody don't understand that. So it's one of those things where every situation is different. But if we're going to just judge people, and this is why I said it comes down to the department, because what happens is the department will say what I said, oh, we saw you use profanity there, so that's another write-up.
Right.
And it's like, you're taking the human element out of it because
Right.
everybody doesn't communicate the same way. Like, I don't look at profanity in a situation where, first of all, it's not warranted all the time. It's not needed all the time. But there are scenarios where I think it's necessary.
Right.
So
Where it works to maybe de-escalate a situation
exactly.
without having
If
to
it's
use a weapon.
used a certain
Right.
way, it can be a form of de-escalation when you start talking about relatability.
Right.
But, if the department doesn't understand that or won't allow it, and now they look down upon it, now you get more of a cookie cutter response from police officers when they deal with the public. And yeah, some people might say, well, yeah, we want a more uniform approach. And that's fine. It's just you got to understand what comes along with that.
Right. Right.
So, yeah.
Well, I definitely have learned a lot about policing and a lot of the things that might need to change or might be improved upon. It sounds like what we need maybe is better training, which might mean more funding, and really evaluating how we're approaching, how we treat police officers and
Right.
and what kind of allowances we give them and what we need to maybe rein in.
Yeah. That's good.
Well, I'm not stupid about policing anymore.
Good. That's it, guys. Thank you for tuning in.